Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new podcast, Violent Urges, hosted by yours truly, Pedro Lopez,
Clarissa.
and this will be a new podcast that we're releasing every week. At least I hope, as long as I'm able to edit them in time. But today we'll be covering two cases. I'll be representing one. Clary will be representing the other one, and we actually don't know the case that the other person is doing, so we'll be reacting to it live for the first time. All right, and then I'll go ahead and start. My case is of a Japanese man named Issei Sagawa. So, this man is a known cannibal, murderer, and necrophile with a PhD, an IMDb page, and most surprisingly of all, freedom. Issei Sagawa, which I'll be referring to as Izzy for the rest of this episode, is also known as a cannibal celebrity, and he's a part subject of our fucked up episode today. It's been argued time and time again whether monsters are born from nature or nurture, or a combination of both. And I think, Clary, you and I have even argued this point before. But it's likely that in this case, it is more nature than nurture. Issei was born on June 11th, 1949 in Japan to wealthy parents. Issei states in his Vice documentary that his childhood was, in his words, the best time of my life. Also mentioning that his parents were loving and had a fondness for nature that they shared with their children, which is not the backstory you'd expect from a murderer/cannibal. However, Issei did resent himself growing up for being short and frail, standing at a mere 5 feet tall, which he accredited to his premature birth and self-hatred. When he was young, he didn't know anything about sex and was often embarrassed when he had erections, thinking he was sick. He didn't know how to masturbate and did fucked up things like having his dog lick him off when he got erections.
I've heard stories about dudes putting peanut butter like all over their dick and then just being like, "Come here, Spot."
You have to have some sick, fucked up mind to do that.
Did he? Okay, when was this case? Because if he had internet connection, I'm thinking like there are many other ways.
So he was born in 1949.
Okay, so they had like
1950s.
magazines.
Yeah, they had magazines. So he was probably doing this when he was, like 14, 13. So like 1950 something. No, 19, what is that? Like 1961, 1962. And as far as his cannibalistic pleasures, he believes they actually stem from a dream that he had as a child, where him and his brother were being boiled to be eaten. And he wondered from that point on what eating a human would be like. When he was in first grade, he was fascinated by a young man's thigh, and he described the young man as handsome. His first attraction to a woman in a cannibalistic manner was a crush of his, who he described as having pale legs and wearing short skirts, which made him want to eat her flesh. He attributes his affection to the foreign woman because they were strong and tall, which is the opposite of what he was, short and frail. So he consistently brought up this weird obsession with like foreign women, and was consistently like against like being with a Japanese woman and only going for foreign women.
Okay, this definitely sounds like mental illness. Like obviously, almost every serial killer, like murder person has like some type of mental illness. But like it doesn't sound like something like this person had violent parents and so he grew up to be violent. Like that's some weird stuff, man. Like when I look at a hot guy, I don't look at his thigh and be like, "Oh my god, that looks delicious. I could just fry it up on the grill." Like that's some next level stuff.
Yeah, I didn't include it in like my outline, but even at the beginning of the Vice interview, he stated that he like legit thinks he's an alien from another world where everyone is a cannibal. And he consistently like during his interviews and stuff that I've researched, he consistently says like I don't understand. Like he definitely doesn't understand why other people aren't cannibals. Like he can't wrap his mind around other people not wanting to do what he wants to do. So I think it's definitely some sort of mental illness that he has. So where he lived in Tokyo, he was fascinated by a woman who was white and lived in the same apartments that his grandma lived in. One day, he actually snuck into her apartment while she was asleep and grabbed an umbrella in the room in an attempt to kill her. But fortunately, she woke up and called the police. Issei was then classified as a danger to society by a psychiatrist, but thanks to his wealthy father, that was quickly covered up and he was sent to school overseas at the University of Paris. And this is a trend that you'll continue to see where his wealthy father would literally take him out of any situation that he's in.
You know what's funny is my case is pretty much the same.
Really?
Like there's that same trend where like wealth and status is something that allowed this pretty much the trial and the entire thing to just be covered up.
Now that he's in Paris, we'll go ahead and talk about the murder. So Issei, 32 at the time, first noticed his victim, Renée Hartevelt, near the end of his poetry course. He thought she was beautiful. As stated earlier, he did have an attraction toward a foreign woman, and Renée fit the bill because, as he said in his Vice interview, I'd never seen a woman like her before. In order to not draw attention to himself, he ended up sketching Renée during class. Again, using his father's wealth, he actually convinced Renée to be his German tutor, where they actually became somewhat friends, according to articles. However, this would come to an end when Issei asked her to come over under the pretense that their professor had asked him to record some German poetry, and Issei wanted Renée's help. Renée agreed and recorded German poetry of Issei choosing, only for Issei to reach for a gun while she was distracting reading and shoot her from behind in the neck. And this was another thing that, like, he wouldn't have been able to do this if it wasn't for his wealthy father. Well, I mean, I'm not blaming the father, but the only way that he was able to connect with this woman was because she was his tutor, and he was using his dad's money to have her tutor him, which is like, he continually used access to money to do whatever he wanted.
It's crazy too because you think like if his dad hadn't sent him away and like actually paid for him to get help, then like what could have happened instead? Like could this dude have been able to get the help he needed to become like a functioning person, or I don't know.
Well, keep that thought in your mind once we go into what happened after the murder. So according to Issei, she continued to talk even after being shot before falling silently, first collapsing onto the desk and then onto the floor. Issei then proceeded to put a towel under her head, I assume to soak up the blood, and completely undressed her. Issei even considered calling an ambulance. Some articles say that he may have passed out right after committing the murder, but I couldn't really find any backed up sources for that. But eventually, he let his urges take over. And I warn any listeners right now, if you have any... This is a trigger warning for SA and R. So if you're triggered by those things, skip forward maybe a minute or two. So he then proceeded to rape her after she was shot dead. He had this all planned out in his sick, fucking demented head, even stating that he wanted to eat her ass first because he thought it looked most delicious. Then even further specifying that it was that he wanted to do the right butt cheek because it was the farthest from the heart and he was scared of blood. He first bit into it with his teeth, finding that it was far too difficult to eat that way. Proceeded to try with a fruit knife, only to find out that wasn't enough, and then proceeded to buy a curved meat knife from the local market. He then proceeded to dismember the body in his bathroom and place his favorite parts in the fridge. And photos of this crime scene are available online. And if you watch the Vice interview, which if you want to learn more about this case, you definitely should, but be warned that the Vice interview doesn't warn you. It just shows you images of the cut up body. They're extremely graphic. They're disgusting, but if you want to look at them, they are available online. I won't provide any sources, but they are there. So that's what he did. He invited his German tutor over for tutoring, shot her in the back of her head, and then raped her and dismembered the body.
That's crazy. That's disgusting.
He had it all planned out. Like, he had the gun hidden. He knew exactly where she should be. He set up a distraction so she wouldn't notice.
That's crazy because he started to eat her and then was like, oh, I can't cut through. So let me go to the store, chop her up, put her in the fridge. Like, that's insane.
Yeah. And yeah, I wouldn't say it gets worse, but he does some weird shit after this too. So directly after the murder, because June is one of the hottest months in Paris, Issei was afraid the body would rot and he knew he needed to get rid of it. He decided to cut the body up and use tips he had learned from a butcher he met on a luxury boat on a Greece vacation. He even went as far as to send a thank you letter to the butcher after the incident. So this butcher, just innocent butcher, gave him tips on how to cut up like butcher meat, and then Issei sent him like describing what he had used the tips for. Like imagine
Oh my
being that
gosh.
butcher.
I can't. I would feel, well, first of all, I feel like partially responsible, even though obviously it's not the butcher's fault, but I mean, can you imagine getting a letter that says, "Hey, thanks for teaching me what you did. I was now able to cut up the body of my German tutor."
Exactly, it'd be fucking terrifying. Well, he then bought 2 suitcases and stuffed the body into them before dumping them at Bois de Boulogne Lake. And sorry if I mispronounce anything, all this stuff was in French, so I don't know French. The cab driver that took him to the lake was surprised the bags were so heavy and even asked if there was a corpse in them, which is really freaky. And then Issei was just like, ha ha ha, no, why would there be bodies in my suitcase? When he got to the lake, it was still bright. It was 8 p.m., but 8 p.m. in summertime, as we know, is still pretty bright, and the lake was full of people. Issei proceeded to push the bags down a hill to the edge of a lake, only to be distracted by an old man with a child across the lake. While he was distracted, someone proceeded to open one of his bags. The man screamed and asked if they were his. Issei responded no and walked away, calmly, as the man opened the suitcase to find this dismembered body and yelled murderer to a woman up the hill, pointing at Issei. Now Issei is arrested. He was arrested 4 days later. Issei said he actually felt relieved to be arrested, as he could finally talk to people. And after talking to 3 psychiatrists, they declared him mentally insane and unfit to stand trial, which the judge used to then send him to a criminal psych ward for what the judge thought would be the rest of his life. Now, this is the thing. Before Issei got any treatment, he actually enraged the French public as he was being kept at their expense, and he was quickly deported back to Japan, which would prove to be a mistake. And this is the thing about, I'm talking about the wealthy father. Some articles do state that it was actually his father who made a deal with French authorities to send him back to Japan, but who really knows? Like none of this is backed up, but either Paris fucked up by sending him back to Japan, or his dad just paid authorities in Paris to send him back to Japan. Which either way we'll quickly see was the wrong thing to do. When he arrived in Japan, he knew that they had made up their mind and they diagnosed him with a personality disorder as opposed to being mentally insane. And since the charges had been dropped in Paris due to being considered unfit for trial, the documents were sealed and unavailable for Japanese authorities. This allowed him to not undergo any treatment, and he checked himself out of the hospital to be free 5 years after his crime and 15 months after arriving in Japan. Quickly after that, he was contacted by a newspaper that supposedly paid him upwards of $20,000 to write an article, and he proceeded to write a book based on that experience. Up to this point in time, he's written over 20 books based on his crimes, including a loli comic. He also discovered that he truly loved to paint women who he believes are beautiful and is often seen doing nude art. He even wrote a book that contained images of the victim and their dismembered bodies. And he's consistently asked to sign these copies of the book. Like, people come up to him with the book of the dismembered body and ask him to sign.
I bet. Man, that kind of reminds me of the story of, like, this young girl named Mary who, when she was, like, 11 or something, or 8, like, really young, she killed, like, this 4-year-old boy and then took a knife and, like, carved M in his stomach and was, like, carving into him. And, I mean, I don't really know exactly what happened, but she wrote a book, too, and, like, the same thing happened where people would read it and be like, oh my gosh, like, that's so insane. That's so awesome. But it's like, I don't know, how would you feel if you were, like, the family of the girl that was killed or the family of the boy that was killed, and you knew that people were treating this person like they were a celebrity? Like, that would make me sick.
That's the thing, like, up to this point, imagine the victim's family. Like, not only did the person who committed the crime serve only 5 years in jail and is now has been a free man ever since, but has also become a celebrity and has earned a lot of money due to the fact that he killed, like, your relative. Like, that's so fucked up.
And you know what's crazy? Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, that happens a lot in today, where you have like celebrities or people with a lot of power and influence that get away with these crimes, and it's everything. It's things from like sexual assault to murder to assault, all these things, and they just get away with it because they have power and influence and money.
Yeah, it's really fucked up to see. And to go on to the other things he did, he even had a film where he was paid to pretend to eat meat. So he pretended to eat human meat. He reenacted Little Red Riding Hood, where he played the wolf. And they even had him test his strength because they knew he was frail. To show, I don't know, it was like a fucked up, like, weird Japanese film where they made him do a bunch of like random things and just paid him for it. And so even after he was released, he chased after Western women, even stealing money from his father to use on said woman. At one time he sold his brother's cello, sold his brother's paintings, used his dad's credit card, and there's a lot of other fucked up things he did. But one of the most fucked up things he did was he made a sex tape, right? Where he hired a director who then hired a porn actress to have sex with him 3 times. Now, the thing that was fucked up about this thing was when the director came up to the porn actress, he was like, hey, there's this gentleman, you need to have sex with him 3 times and then spend 24 hours with him, right? And the actress was like, okay, like, whatever, like, this is my job, like, I'm just gonna do it. And then, so, once they were actually there, they had sex 3 times, and the actress was still like, everything was fine, because that's what she was signed up to do. But then, what happened was the director had Issei explain his murders to the porn actress in graphic detail, even showing her images of what he had done to the woman, knowing that the porn actress would have to stay there for another 24 hours.
Okay, so, that is definitely illegal. I mean, yeah. I get, okay, you're saying like you agree to do this video and you agree to that, but to traumatize this person and then to say like, oh, but you can't leave. I mean, that's not far from kidnapping, saying like, sorry, you can't leave. That's insane.
Yeah, and like you can see in the video that she's like scared for her life, because I mean, who wouldn't be? Like, Issei even comments on it, saying that she had covered up her legs right after she was told about his like sick fantasies, because she was like so scared, and she had to stay there up until the 24 hours were up. And then once the 24 hours were up, like an instant relief fell over. Like, there's videos of it, and they showed a little bit of it in the Vice interview, but you can see like instant relief when she was able to leave, because like, I mean, who wouldn't be terrified?
Yeah.
And right after, and even during that time that he was with her, he tells her that he has an urge to drink her urine and swallow her saliva. And even up to this day, he masturbates to this footage often. And the weirdest part is that they later become friends, even after she was left in shock from the footage. And according to him, she helped him slowly change his ways. That's what he says, but his ways aren't changed at all, because we'll see that even to this day, he doesn't feel any remorse for what he's done and lives in total isolation. The only way he's suppressing his cannibalistic desires is through masturbation, which he masturbates so much that eventually he became impotent. And not being able to masturbate, in his words, makes him believe his urges will come back. He even said with absolute pride, "Just today, I saw a girl with a really nice derriere on my way to the train station. When I see things like that, I think about wanting to eat someone again before I die. So yes, I still harbor these desires, and I specifically want to eat a Japanese woman this time." He ends his Vice interview by saying he has now grown a larger urge than his cannibalistic ones. His urge to be killed, slowly torn apart so he can suffer. But even then, he reiterates that he'd rather die by the hands of a beautiful woman than a man.
Okay. This dude needs to be locked up.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's fucked up. Like, he has absolutely no regrets on anything. And he during the whole interview, he kept referring to his crime as an incident. like never wanting to say like I murdered or I ate a woman. Like he just says, "Oh, like the incident, the incident."
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in a way, he's doing that because he doesn't think that what he did was necessarily bad. Like he said, he doesn't feel remorse for it. So he's going to refer to it like, oh, you know, that one time, the way that we would say, like, hey, remember that one time that we did this? Like, he's going to think about it the same way because he doesn't feel that remorse.
Yeah.
And he literally said he plans on killing someone else. So, I don't know. I mean, if it weren't for his dad's money, obviously, like, the whole thing in the beginning probably wouldn't have happened. But, yeah.
The last part, the way I'll end this case is Issei names this one thing as his only regret in committing his crime. Is he says, and this is in his own words, "What I truly wished was to eat her living flesh," he said. "What I truly wished was to eat her living flesh. Nobody believes me, but my ultimate intention was to eat her, not necessarily kill her." He's a fucked up guy, clearly has a mental illness that they decided not to treat. Not only did his parents ignore it, but also the authorities ignored it and let him go. And he lives on to this day with saying proudly to the public that he will eat again and wants to eat again before he dies.
Well, that being said, my murderess is probably going to shock you.
It's a woman?
It is. Of course, I'm going to do a female serial killer because, like, power to women. So I didn't do as much background research. It's probably going to be a lot shorter than yours because, like, I wanted to find something. Like, I wanted to find sources that weren't just like, this blog says that this happened, or I read a YouTube video that said this, you know? Because, like, we all read YouTube videos every once in a while that are just insane. So, my serial killer was a woman born in Hungary in 1560 named Countess Elizabeth Bathory, nicknamed the Blood Countess. And this woman would make Dracula quiver in his crypt. So, if you ever, like, you know, looked at, like, pretty much the story of Dracula is based on an actual prince. And he was known as, I think his name was Prince Victor the Impaler. But the legend of Dracula, the original legend, never actually states that he drank people's blood. Well, this woman, later called the Blood Countess, Countess Dracula, she did. There's the court case in the 1600s has evidence that she would drink and bathe in the blood of young girls to retain her youthful glow.
Oh, you know what's weird about that? It reminds me, my guy Issei, since he grew up really frail and short, he thought that by eating his victims, he'd absorb their power, which is another reason he liked tall European women, because he felt that they were tall and strong, and by eating them, he'd gain their power. So I think that's a common thing with people who drink blood and cannibals who eat flesh, like consuming other people's soul or consuming other people's, like, flesh is sort of like power grab almost.
Yeah, like getting their traits, absorbing them to become more like them.
Exactly.
So yeah, so pretty much what she did is, so she, obviously as a countess, you own a castle. And so she had pretty much recruited, the numbers vary. So the lowest number I've seen was 65, and the largest number, 650 girls. She recruited them, saying that she had this great economic prospect for them and invited them to work at her castle. And she wasn't the only one. She actually had 2 or 3 other girls that were helping her bring more and more young girls into her castle to work for her. So this is believed to have started in about 1590, and then her trial was, I think, 1610.
So 20
Um,
years.
yeah. So for 20 years, she would pretty much bring these young girls into her castle and say, like, oh, I have work for you. And so a lot of them were obviously, like, poor or peasant girls. And the Blood Countess, Countess Bathory, has inspired a bunch of films. So obviously the Countess Dracula, which was, I believe, a book and a film. And then you have Daughters of Darkness, which is about the Countess who has spent like the last 300 years living as a vampire. You have Legend of Blood Castle. So she's inspired all these films about these like female versions of Dracula. And so, I mean, on the most basic level, what she did is she would slaughter these girls and either drink or drain their blood, and then she would soak in it because she believed that there was like this magical power in them that would keep her young. And this was inspired by like early modern, it's called like pseudo life. And there was like accounts all over talking about like sorcerers who would pretty much like take the life out of younger people and use it to like stay pretty much young forever.
Isn't that a thing that like people actually do, like treatments with blood? Like I don't think it's human blood, but like people do treatments with like pig blood and things like that to like rejuvenate the skin.
I've seen like these things called vampire masks, but I didn't think that they were actual bloods.
'Cause I think there is a thing where there's like actual animal blood.
Well, that's disgusting. And as a vegan, I would never ever do that.
As a vegan.
Anyway, so in 1610 there was a trial, right? And she had a bunch of eyewitnesses, and they said that they had either witnessed or heard these girls being tortured. And at first they were thinking like 100 girls, but this countess kept a journal, and in the journal it had the names of 650 girls.
Jesus.
And so they believed that that was the amount of girls that she had killed, and either it drained their blood by drinking it or by draining it pretty much like into a bathtub and soaking in it. So obviously, you know, she had a bunch of people that came forward and said like this person is who people say she is. You know, she's this violent, blood-sucking countess. And so she was sentenced, and, you know, obviously any of these crimes, whether it's today, in the 16th century, wherever, 17th century, when you kill 650 people and so obviously, like, it doesn't really matter the time period. Obviously, our laws have changed. But when you kill 650 people, you're going to be imprisoned, and you're going to be executed.
Sure.
Well, because she was a countess, because of her family's importance, she wasn't. She ended up being imprisoned in this castle in Upper Hungary, now Slovakia. And that's pretty much where she died. But her legend lived on as this female version of Dracula. So there's a bunch of names for her. Obviously, I mentioned like Countess Dracula or the Blood Countess. And then there's also a bunch of folklore that she's pretty much inspired. Even though they're like the accounts are kind of focusing on the fact that she did it because she thought that it was going to give her like youth. It was thought that she actually got a lot of sadistic pleasure from this, which is why she didn't just like kill. Can you see? She didn't just like kill the people or like the young girls. She would actually like torture them first. And yeah, so there's no exact number about the amount of people that she tortured or the amount of people that she killed, but it is estimated that she killed around 150 people. Personally, I think it would be insane to have 650 girls go missing, no matter where you are and what time period, and not have anyone be suspicious after 20 years. So I think that 150 people would be a much more reliable number.
Yeah,
But
650 is insane. Like
yeah,
I did the math. That's 32 and a half girls per year, or about 3 girls per month, like continuously for 20 years.
I mean, obviously, if you live in like a giant castle on a bunch of land, who knows how many people you might need, but like to have 650 people just like randomly go missing is that would be
But that's the other thing.
kind of crazy.
If she was preying on like young girls who, like you said, were poor and like needed money and things like that, they they're living like a more high risk life, which like for now would be like sex workers and things like that, where they were taken advantage of like in the early 1900s, where like they could go missing and no one would know because they've been exiled from their family and such, and they wouldn't really have anyone who would see them on a daily basis. So it'd be easier to prey on those girls as opposed to girls from higher income families.
Yeah, especially if you were like, servants used to live on the land of their people that they worked for. So, and especially like at this time, there was a bunch of things, that could have, the mortality rate was a lot higher. But 650 people in 20 years, that is an insane number. Yeah, pretty crazy.
Like I said, both people with a mental illness and a craving for human.
And that's why this episode was called Corn on the Macabre.
Well, I think that's it for today's episode, everyone. Thank you so much for listening in, and hopefully we'll be back next week with 2 brand new murders to talk about, to discuss, and to hopefully help you learn about. This has been Pedro.
And Clary.
Bye.
Bye.